during this conference. And I have taken some notes here that I forgot, so I'm taking this back. So I've been to most of the panels. And what I have learned is that AI seems to be an exciting, is living a very exciting moment at the now, but there is still, according to the experts, a long way to go, and humans are still more intelligent than machines, according to our experts. Also, the data is the new oil, and we should be aware as translators of what we do with our data. Also, we saw the panel on NMT. They announced that SMT, statistical machine translation, was dead. I've seen 2 deaths already in my years as a researcher. So I don't know when NMT will be announced that it will die. But also exciting times in NMT. Researchers were very exciting of the new changes. They were saying there will be more change. It has changed more in 2 years than in the last 10. So I thought that was very interesting. Also, there is a slight new shift in how we understand machine translation, shifting from segment level to document level, which I think that is going to change quite a lot how we see things in the future. The panel on translators, we discussed how translators work with data, and they more or less everyone agreed that the new profile of a translator is a digital translator, but that still machine translation was not, the human parity is not there, even though there is a certain hype in the media. We also realized with the panel on GDPR how we are struggling a little bit to understand, so we need more training on what GDPR is and how it affects translators. We heard from the European Union that they are heavily investing in language, and they are moving on to investing in language technology, so this is good for all of us. Then today, we started with a very live talk, but we also realized that according to a machine, we have 38% chances of disappearing, and we have to start worrying. I think everybody, I think, is aware that the profession is changing and that we need to reinvent ourselves. And I think we have, a lot of us have been talking about more emphasis on technology, yes, but more emphasis on writing, on technical writing, creative writing, to differentiate ourselves from machines. And also on our data sharing panel, again, the importance of our data, of the data from translators, and that there might be a future market for that. We don't know exactly how that will happen, but it will be there. And then finally, the commissioner has spoken about how important and vital translation is, and for the communication in Europe in such a diverse multilingual region as this is. I think this is the first thing that we all see when we come to Europe, is that, you do 20 kilometers and there is another language, And I'm originally from Argentina, and you do 1,000, 5,000 kilometers, and it's only Spanish. But here, Europe is very diverse, and I think technology can help also to keep the languages and to preserve, as we saw as well in the translation panel with Welsh. So these are my takeaways. I hope you have your takeaways as well. And now that I have all my panelists here, I will invite them to choose one of the pictures that Matthew was drawing And I want everyone to give a big applause to Matthew for a great job on drawing. Thank you. He has been working very hard for these 2 days. So without further ado, I want, do you want to choose your, you chose already your picture.
Yeah, I think we all did. Is this working?
Oh, there is,
so that we don't,
I think, okay.
I think it is. No?
There is a delay, but sometimes.
Okay, now it's working?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the good news is that this is the last panel, because I saw a lot of micro expressions developing. So we will be done in about an hour or two, yeah? No, yes. Less than that. Haro, where is Haro? Yeah, that's him. He said to us, choose pictures and talk about those pictures. And he was very persistent. And when I chose my picture, he said to me, but this picture was chosen by Karim. I said, but then I will go with this one. And he said, but this picture was chosen by Anna. I said, but sorry, I mean, I have to then, if you like, compromise and accept that we can have parallel thinking that converges. And therefore, the picture I chose is this one. I think that's the same one that Karim chose. Why did I choose this picture? Okay. Because it projects the elements that, in my mind, are particular, on the one hand, for every industry, but specific also a little bit for the translation industry. The 3 elements. The human element is there. The machine is there. Okay, it's a bicycle, but still a machine. The software is there. AI is there. What is surrounding the picture also is what keeps these 3 elements together, and that's data. The common thing that all of these 3 elements in this picture have is the data sharing that they do. And I will not be very long, but I will take each one of these elements and speak for about a minute or 2 for each one, starting with the machines. Since last Friday, we have now in Europe the most powerful computer working in Manchester. It was deployed last Friday at the University of Manchester. It's a neuromorphic computer, similar to when we discuss neural technology in developing algorithms. Now we have a neuromorphic supercomputer, which is made up of 1 million processors. That means 1 million individual computers combined in one. I will not bore you with figures. I will just tell you that this computer is capable of processing 200 billion instructions per second. So the element of machines is developing, it will keep developing, and is ongoing, and it will never finish. The element of software is what most times keeps us back in technology. I have been in IT industry for 25 years. I'm an IT geek. So, and always I have experienced this phenomenon that the software is what keeps back the development in technology and not the machines. The same goes true for translation language tools. The computing power is there, but the software developments are not matching the developments in the engines we produce. Nevertheless, they are there, and they will be there, and they will be constantly evolving. Nothing is revolutionary in this industry, in the IT or in the translation. I always talk about evolution and not revolution, and this is what we will experience, we will keep experiencing, and we have been experiencing. The human element is the center, is in the center of everything. It's what brings together in a symbiosis. I heard this nice Greek word. Karim used a lot of Greek words today, so I'm allowed to use a Greek word too. I think the element of symbiosis of all of these components of the picture that I see there is what inspires me for the picture. And then last but not least is the data, which is the articulating and joining element in the picture. I personally believe that does translation have an artificially intelligent future? Yes, it does. The job of a translator, however, will develop, will evolve, and will be, reformed is one word, I use transformed. I think the job of a translator will become more interesting. It will provide, and the tools and the technology and the machines will provide facilitation and speed with which we deliver service. So, all in all, that's why I chose this picture, because it brings all of these elements, and all of these things have been discussed, I think, exhaustively in the last day and a half here, and that's what inspired me.
I'll ask Annette now. Which one did you choose and why?
Okay, first of all,
I'll
sorry,
give you a mic.
yeah. First of all, I have to admit I didn't have much time to choose. And most of them are fabulously complicated with a lot of information, etc., etc. And if you give a translator time to talk, we'll be here for an hour. So I thought something more straightforward. So I also picked the same one as my colleague here, the human in the loop. First of all, because it's clear, it's cohesive, I can see bits and pieces. I'm a textual person more than a visual person. But the main reason, I think, is because the human is at the center of it. And the human is there in yellow, and it's bright, and it's a bright future. And in translation, I think the market, or the translation market, the industry is dividing. It's certainly dividing. It's going down the mainly MT way, AI way, etc., etc. But I think the high value end of it, whether it's legal, whether it's advertising, transcreation, whatever we want to call it, is still going to be very much there and is also going to increase in the future. And I think as associations, as teachers of translators, we need to recognize that that the market is dividing, and I suppose begin to prepare our students and our members for it. To come back to the picture, the human element as well, there's a great danger, not just in translation, that machine good, human bad. There's a real tendency to say that, for people to think that machines are perfect, flawless, etc., etc. Humans are flawed. But I think we really need to support our translators. They're well qualified, talented, experts in their area, and we need to encourage, highlight and encourage people to value their work. Not only clients who are going to use them, but also the translators themselves. Sometimes they're really not aware of how valuable they are in society. I mean, without translators, there's no translation industry. Without translators at the moment, there's no Europe, there's no European Union. And I think we need to pass that message on to everybody involved in the industry to encourage, to improve, to highlight the value of the human, while also recognizing that the industry is changing.
Thank you, Annette. Karim, did you choose the same one?
Yes. Well, I think this is great when you give people a choice. You know, then sometimes they choose different things, and sometimes it coalesces around one emblematic image. But the reason, what I found really remarkable about the picture was that it's a very uncomfortable ride. This is not a very good bicycle. I mean, I come from Holland. We have bicycles and we have wheels on them, you know. And this is really what happens when you shift from one paradigm to another. The paradigm that you're leaving felt comfortable because you grew up in it, because it was the world that you knew, but it's no longer working as well. So it's starting to wear out. There is a sense of irritation, there's a sense of frustration, sometimes there is pain. But the new paradigm, namely the bicycle, is not working yet because we haven't sussed out the wheels. They're square. And so the new paradigm is not comfortable yet. And the transition period between the one and the other is particularly uncomfortable. So the difficulty of making a shift, I think, often is how do you accept this period of discomfort? Do you accept this period where you have to let go of old certainties before you acquire new ones? And in some of the transitions with some of the organizations I work with, we think that the minimum time is 2 years and 2 to 7 years to make a transition. But you know what we've heard from machine translations, there have been many transitions already. The only other thing that occurred to me is that platforms and stuff make other forms possible as well. It's not just the fact that you're going to be collaborating with a machine, but maybe you're going to be collaborating with a lot of other translators as well. You know, this kind of crowdsourcing of translation can be facilitated through platforms in a way that it wasn't in the past. So the shift from an individual translator who works as a self-contained unit to somebody who is a kind of co-worker or a co-translator, and then who owns the translation, who's the author of the translation, when things become so much more collaborative, and not with 2 or 3 people, but with 500 or 5,000 or something like that. So the shift and the difficulty in the shift is something that I really liked in that picture.
Yeah, I think this might become the picture of the conference, because when I was asked, I also chose this one for a different reason as well, because as translators, you know, we were talking here about a very sophisticated AI, and then somebody was saying, I cannot even convert my PDF to, you know, to translate it. What do I do with the layout? So we live together with this very sophisticated AI, but sometimes it doesn't work. That's what I thought it was appealing, because still we need more fluid communication with machines. That is, we discussed this with Elisabetta. So I went then, because everyone had chosen the one on AI, I went with the neural on the panel on neural machine translation, because I thought it was an excellent panel, first of all, because it brought it closer to all of us. Talking about a technology that I think everybody feels we all, I think, even if we like it, we all have 2 feelings, you know, we like it and we hated it. And sometimes I feel I'm Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, with these 2 very opposed feelings, because on one side it's great and I use it for my everyday life, and I have done a lot of research on the impact of machine translation on translators and the users. But on the other hand, it lacks the empathy, the humanity, the emotion that I see in translations of poetry, literary, and sometimes even in technical or marketing translations. So I think this is why I chose this cartoon, because it appeals to what is changing now. It also was funny that I think, if I recall correctly, SMT is buried there. So I thought that was quite funny, even though a lot of people are still using SMT. But in this conference, we have buried the technology, and we are all ready for NMT. And also, you know, there is quite a lot of effort in this picture as well. So there are a lot of humans behind machine translation. It's not translation, and it's not so machine-like. There are more humans behind, thinking very carefully how to code and how to understand language and understand how language works to produce an output. So there is a lot of humanity as well in machine translation, and humans are also at the center of this technology. So this was my choice. Any other comments from the panelists? Final comments? So we would like to open to the audience now to use, we have a little poll in Slido that we would like you to participate, but also we would like to listen from you if you have questions, or if you have also comments on the things that you learned about the conference. improvements in the conference. So the floor is a little bit yours now. Can we see the poll? The last poll I tell you on... Describe TEF 2018 in one word. Let's see how that works. So maybe I'll ask the panelists as well to think about one word to describe TEF. I like that, Centaur. Results are hitting. They don't want to give us ideas. Your idea of the Centaur, Karim, has really taken from...
Yeah, well, it's certainly not my idea. I think it's Kasparov and then Michel Zappa. But it's this, maybe it's a nice word to catch this transition and this transformation and the dual nature of it. One of the things I was reminded is that perhaps we're already more centaurs than we think we are. I drive a very old car. So my car still kind of drives the way I want to drive it. But most modern cars really kind of adapt the driving style. If you brake too hard, the car will self-correct. If you steer the wrong way, the car will self-correct. It's no longer possible to be an autonomous driver in a car because the car drives with you. And so in that sense, in many ways, we're already making a kind of symbiotic change to becoming partly dependent on machine assistance. And certainly for other things, pilots, doctors. There was an interesting question once ethically. Would you like to be diagnosed by a human doctor, or would you like to be diagnosed by a machine doctor, by an artificial intelligence doctor? And the remarkable thing was you don't have a choice, because the human doctor will use the machine doctor for all their diagnoses. So basically, you can choose between the human without the equipment or the human with the equipment. But the choice of just the human, you could use the equipment or the human and the equipment, but you can't use the human anymore. And so in that sense, perhaps it's less scary because we've already made the transition. And if the transition is slight, then we slowly become accustomed to it.
Thank you, Karim. Any comments? Christos? Can I call you Christos? Yes, sure.
Okay, look, for me, the key word here is it working? Okay. All of this is of course, valid. What represents me more is what I said before, transformation. Transformation is an ongoing process in all industries, including the translation industry. I have lived transformations in the IT industry that really shocked me in the end. You know, at one point in time, I was working for a company that was producing printers. And we had a conference somewhere around London just when Microsoft came out with this new software called email. And everybody started thinking, people are not going to be printing anymore here. What is going to happen to our industry? And we were thinking what sort of jobs we should be looking for the year after. The next conference the year after, we realized that our sales went up because people were printing even more because they were printing their emails. So a transformation is not something that you can predict. Mostly what we are doing here is speculation. We are thinking what will happen. And the other important thing for me is that nothing happens immediately. It's always gradual. We will experience and we will keep experiencing gradual transformations. Like I said, evolutions. So I'm not sure that 38% of the translators will lose their jobs. On the contrary, I think that all industries, in that sense then, should reflect whether they will lose their jobs or not. I was reading a couple of days ago that in China, somebody mentioned China in another panel, where they are doing a lot of work in artificial intelligence. They have replaced for the first time in the national Chinese TV, the state channel, they have replaced their newscaster with a virtual newscaster. So they created an avatar, and that avatar delivers the news over the TV. So even the industries or the professions that never think will be affected by the evolution of technology will be affected. So I do believe that the translation industry will be affected, of course, and we are already. I also believe that we are experiencing a transformation in the profile of the translator. I speak of a multi-skilled, multitask translator. I don't believe that highly specialized translators will be in need. Neither do I think that they will be able to survive in a competitive market where pricing defines who survives. I think translators will need to evolve in such a way that they should be able to do a lot of things at the same time. Having said that, the translators or the profession of the translation, I think, will be facilitated, will be enriched, and will be, like I said before, use the technology in such a way that it will allow it to survive, but in a different mode, like we know it now. I talked before about data. For me, the most fundamental element in the whole, in the pictures we saw before, and in the whole paradigm of any industry is data. I have problems as an IT person accepting the use of term data in translation. Because in translation we have text. Usually when we talk about data, we talk about facts and figures that we process, we convert it to information, and that information allows us to make decisions. And I was thinking, how can we talk about data in translation? And then I realized that now we are processing texts using artificial intelligence. We are transforming the text into another language, and we beef it up, we spice it with terminology, with precision, with accuracy, using the various terminological databases, and we produce another text that is also used as a vehicle, as a message for people based upon which they make decisions. So that's how I related the whole aspect of data here. I hope I did not get too sophisticated or too philosophical, but this is how I see it. And therefore, the job of a translation, of a translator, like I said before, will develop along the areas of data curation, terminology work, because any machine and any piece of software is useless unless it has the right data to work with. I saw in one of the pictures, again, an IT slogan that came in the late 80s, early 90s, which was called G.I. Joe Giggle, garbage in, garbage out. Somewhere it must have prevailed in this forum. It's the same thing. If we do not insert in the machine, in the software, the right type of data, linguistic data, text, then we will not be getting the right translation. So all in all, transformation for me.
Okay. It takes some minutes.
Okay, following an IT person is always difficult, of course. Okay, I think if I was to choose one word to describe the conference, maybe a very touchy-feely word, understanding, where hopefully we've come to an understanding of how the industry is at the moment, how it is likely to develop, how a translator actually works, because a lot of decision makers in a lot of companies, in a lot of organizations, have no idea of how it is. So all you hear is cost this, cost that, business, which is obviously important. But if we're getting to the stage where translators are sent into slavery or penury, because you know, companies can't pay them anymore, there's little point, and then we might disappear. But I certainly don't think that's the case. There's more translation around, more translation work, more text, data, if you want to call it that, than ever before. We do need to adapt and realize, as I said before, we're going in two different directions. I disagree with you that the high-level, high-quality end of things is going to disappear. Our 40,000 members in Fit Europe would be very unhappy to agree with you as well, or for me to sit here and agree with you, but I honestly don't think that's going to happen. I do think we need to go right back to the beginning, to the universities, because the universities can't do everything. You cannot prepare, in my opinion, somebody who is absolutely perfect the minute they come out from graduation. It doesn't happen. They need experience, which they're not allowed to get in the translation industry. But there have been students up to a few months beforehand in a totally different mindset. They have lots of skills, but they need experience on the job to be able to become very useful members of the community. And if they're given the chance to do that, a lot of them will actually do that. So yeah, an understanding of how we actually work and how we intend working, I think that is the main thing.
Yes.
Sorry, one of the transformations that we've talked about is about the role and about how to use the machines. The other transformation I think is very much, and it was brought up in the panel, what business model are you going to use? How are you going to make your money? And for me as a philosopher to talk about business models is a bit strange, but I've really grown to love this idea of a business model, because there's a deep question about how do you transfer your work into value? And if we look at the business model of, say, music has changed from making money from recordings to making money from live performances. So you see a real shift from where does the money come from. It's not always a good story. The total amount of money made from the recordings in the music industry is only 10% of what it used to be 20 years ago. So you've lost 90% of your income. And so if you ask yourself what would that mean for translation, I think in a certain sense a diversification, thinking, you know, do I make money selling high-level concepts, consultancy, all the roles that were outlined in the previous panel, I think is a very worthwhile thing to think about. Because the one thing that you're resting on at the moment will go down and might go down precipitously. The other observation that I have is that what's happening in the world is that you're getting the middle is falling out a little bit. You're getting demand for very low-level services, you know, very cheap or almost free translation and high volume, and you're getting demand for artisanal, very human, very specialized, very expensive translation. Just as we like to buy our soap, 5 soaps for €1 or something like that cheaply, but then when we want to treat ourselves to a special fragrance, we go to a shop and spend €15 on a soap. And we're happy doing that. So some people are happy paying a lot of money for something because it's a certain element of quality, it's a certain element of luxury, it's a certain element that they want to pamper themselves. So there is room, there is quite a lot of headroom in the high-level stuff in many industries. And I'm not sure if this exists for translation, but it exists for other industries. But rethinking how do you generate value through your work and how will you generate value 5 or 10 years from now, I think is certainly a worthwhile question. And not to be too defensive about it, but to see it as an opportunity and as a chance to, as a freelancer or as somebody working for an organization, to diversify.
Oh, quite sure.
Yeah. Just coming back to the luxury point you make, I think when people pay, I wouldn't call it very high, they pay higher rates than you'd pay for a machine-translated text that is very little post-editing. But they're not paying for a luxury good. They're paying because their business model requires a high-quality, very specific text to get the message out there. And I think there is a difference between, is it a choice, an option to pay a lot of money for a translation, luxury, or I need to do it because my business demands it. I think there's a big difference.
Thank you all. There are some questions in a Slido that maybe now we can... Well, the first one that we have here is not a question, but congratulations to Karim for for the concept of center that we will all use after this conference. There is a question, what do you think are the most likely spin-off tasks universities should prepare, should prepare to teach for the diversification of a translator career? Maybe Annette wants to take that?
Possibly not the best person to do this, but my experience over the last few years compared to 20 years ago with the students is that their translation skills are not being trained as they should be, that they tend to go straight to machine translation for their text, for their homework, etc., and they're cutting out the actual learning how to translate, learning how to research, to deal with terminology, to recognize different text types. I would try and enforce some kind of way. I think MT is a big problem for teaching, to try and find some other way of doing that, because I do believe if you go on to MT and post-editing, to be a good post-editor, if it's on the same level of revising, you need to be a very good translator. So whichever way they decide to go, I think we need to bring them back and try and force them to read text, to research things, to that whole translation, those elements involved in translation.
Well, if I can add something on that, because I work with technology at the university, I think as translation and as technology is all very diverse, so people say, what are universities doing? And in reality, each university sometimes is doing something different. So I've been teaching post-editing for 9 years, but maybe in other universities, they are not teaching CAD tools. You know, so all that lives together. But I agree with Annette that on one hand, it's very difficult not to teach machine translation because the students in first year, they are using machine translation to get the gist without even being requested to use MT. So how can you not explain how it works and how to make the most of the tool if they are already using the tool? Even without telling you that they are using the tool, you can tell, right? So I think we need to teach how to MT works and how to work with it. And at the same time, we need to work how to write creatively, how to use the human skills that the machine will not be able to use. So 50-50. We agree, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so another question. Will there be an Interpreting Europe forum? Maybe that's for Christos.
We have a service for interpreters. They are over there. And and they do have a conference. I don't know how open that conference is, but we can certainly check and we can post it on the site for the person that asks and give them details.
Thank you. So there is already one. Information is important. Sharing information is certainly key. The keynote speech this morning was very eye-opening, Karim. Praises for you. Rethinking how are we developing our career in the future will be our homework now. Yeah, good. Good that there is that takeaway. They are telling me here, is there any questions from the room? Raise your hand. Yes, the gentleman in blue.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for a fascinating conference. There's a question for Karim, but thank you also for fantastic presentation this morning. I've been reading a lot about the singularity and the future of AI, and there was a very interesting book by a professor of physics at MIT called Max Tegmark, called Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And I wonder if you could comment on your metaphor of a centaur about man working with machines, because in Tegmark's book he said that we're maybe on the cusp of the machines becoming conscious. And I wonder how far you see, is that science fiction, or is it how far on are we towards that? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. In a certain sense, I'm not really qualified to answer the question about whether machines are becoming conscious. I think it will probably take longer than some of the most optimistic things of a few decades. The other thing is, will the machine become conscious in any way like us? You know, what is so remarkable, I think, is that we human beings are creators. We've been tool builders since we evolved from the apes. And in fact, the thing that distinguishes us is the capacity to build ever more complex tools. But what we're now doing is we're, in a certain sense, building a meta tool. We're building our own intelligence as a separate entity. The thing that distinguishes us from animals, the capacity to build and to create, we're now turning that itself into a creation. We've become auto-inventors, inventing our own evolution, perhaps, speeding up our own evolution. And I think we do that through DNA manipulation. We do that through interfering in the very code that determines what it means, what it is to become a human being. And in one of my other areas of interest is, how do we become good creators? How do we make sure that the creations that we make, which are not just the atom bomb or DNA manipulated foodstuffs, but actually our own physical bodies in the future, how do we make sure that we create the kind of humanity that we want? Because we are like children who've suddenly gotten very, very powerful tools. And the question is, are we equipped to use these tools? And often that conversation turns around so-called ethics, you know, be very careful, don't try things. I actually prefer an approach of try lots of things, but become good at creating in a certain sense and take responsibility for the creation that you make. And I think a lot of the discussion around AI, to come back to your question, and the future of the future of conscious AI and the dangers of conscious AI, the work by Nick Bostrom about superintelligence and the danger of superintelligence, is that we become aware of what we're creating. And it's not just intelligence. The question is, how can we adapt? We will probably be creating physical bodies that can live a lot longer than we can live now. 120, 200. Some people believe that the first people who will live to be 1,000 have already been born and are among us. So, you know, we talk about reframing work and reframing your business model if you have a much longer lifespan ahead of you. And I'm not saying it's going to happen or not going to happen in the next few decades, but I think that the deeper underlying question, what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of humanity do we want to establish? What are the values, both ethical but also aesthetic? What is a beautiful world for us to live in? One where we can be joyous in and one we can flourish, I think is a very important question for us to consider and to talk about.
Thank you, Karim. Any other questions in the room? Thank you. Yeah, at the back.
Hello, Dragos Ciobanu from the University of Leeds. I'll play the grumpy person for a change. And I'll just read my question from Slido. I was wondering if we could have the panel's views on whether the AI train is likely to flatten cultural differences and impose a more Anglo-Saxon view of the world of faster, better, have things, do things, as opposed to take some time, think about things, and also enjoy life.
Is there anybody in particular that you want to ask that to, or everyone?
The wisdom of the crowds always wins, so if we could have everyone chipping in, that would be great.
Christos, do you want to start?
Look, I think that, on the contrary, one of the things that we are trying to, and you probably all know, to promote here is the single digital market, meaning that we need to enable every citizen in every member state to transact, to purchase things online in their own language throughout Europe in the first place. So, and we have already tested this concept of having multilingual online resolutions and getting the advice of citizens for various things on the net. And I believe that AI will facilitate that. Machine translation and AI will facilitate that. It will enable us, and Amazon is doing that already. Huh? Amazon is using machine translation to promote products, to engage in online commerce using any possible language that you can think of. In Luxembourg alone, I know they have a dedicated force just for the Benelux area of 60 translators located in Luxembourg. And they are using machine translation on top of that so that they can facilitate and break the language barriers between the consumers and the businesses. And that's why I think that, on the contrary, I do not think that we will end up with an Anglo-Saxon model because of the developments in AI. On the contrary, I think that that will facilitate the multilingualism even more because of the notion of the single digital market. So for every citizen to be able to transact online, over the net, in their own language, that can only be done through the use of machine intelligence. And that's why I think that that is my perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I'm at all qualified to comment on that, but I think, judging by your question, you believe it yourself, that the train is already on the way in that. I'm interested in the Anglo-Saxon model of more efficient, faster, the gig economy, if that doesn't exist elsewhere as well, not just in the UK, and maybe you mean Ireland as well, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure with machine translation, AI, a lot of cultural difference will probably disappear. But maybe it doesn't make much difference in the text or the data that are going to be the subject of AI. Really, quite possible that it makes no difference whatsoever. Whereas the other end of translation, language, etc., cultural difference won't disappear to the same extent.
I want to focus a little bit on that gig economy, and I'm very optimistic about the human future, etc. But I also think we should not be naive. I think you should be ready to have the price of your word translation, the price per word, halved, and then halved again, and then halved again, until you get 1/8 of what you're getting now, 12%. The gig economy, the idea of pitting competitors against each other, the kind of platformization of society, is a threat to certain business models which have been established and protected by organizations, by rules, by states, etc. And again, do I agree? Do I think that's a good thing? Not necessarily. I think there is new levels of precarity which we're inventing, and people who find it much, much harder to make ends meet. But I think it's naive to think that that's not going to happen. And I think there's ways out of it in diversification, in going for different markets. And perhaps if you're very well protected with a full-time job at an organization, or you have a client that is set by law to pay you certain rates, then that won't happen. So in terms of the flattening, in terms of the gig economy, the race to the bottom, I certainly think that's a clear and present danger. Will it become more Anglo-Saxon? I think, well, AI is predominantly English. I think the programming language is based on English. There, of course, is the Chinese equivalent. I'm not even sure if the Chinese programming isn't done with the same Roman programming languages that we use. Perhaps I don't think it is Chinese character based. But you know, there is a globalization flattening system happening anyway, because everybody turns to English as a first common language, as a new lingua franca, as the kind of Latin of the modern world, perhaps. And so, yes, if you want to protect regional languages, I think that requires more than, it requires a very active stance.
From the point of view, I think of, if I look at this question, like machine translation, you know, there is this big criticism that machine translation is gender bias, that machine translation, you know, because machine translation represents society, we train the machines with our data. So I think from that perspective, and that's what I think, well, that made me think about that, your question, is that AI will be as Anglo-Saxon as we make it, because if we use the data and if the data available from that model, then it will be like that. But if we curate the data, like if we curate machine translation not to be so gender biased as it's being done right now, then the machine won't be gender biased. So I think it's up to us a little bit as well to say, well, this is not the model has to be a bit diverse. I don't know if we have answered your question.
You have certainly had a go. Thank you.
Okay, okay. So any other question on the floor?
Je me permets de parler français pour le...
Let me just defend multilingualism by speaking French. I represent the Admiral Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland. I would just like to share with you a particular view that springs to mind at the end of this meeting, namely the role of universities in this transformation process. No university can train or educate young people for a 40-year career. That's not how it's going to happen in future. No university can foresee the changes that will take place in a few years or a few decades. Universities have to teach young people how to teach themselves, how to learn, how to be open to what's happening around them and in their professional fields. We have seen questions from students who have the impression that we can train them for life, for a lifelong career. But we see that in all professions now, one has to adjust to changes at an ever faster pace, even faster than was happening 10 or 20 years ago. So in my view, even if we see major changes in the field of translation, translation will continue to exist. The question is what share, what human share, what machine share, what will those be relative to each other? So we have to learn, we have to teach them about the mechanism of interpreting, and then the precise mix will change over time. They may have to learn they will have to learn new skills and competences. So, but nonetheless, the university's role remains the same, which is to teach people, to teach themselves, to constantly learn and adapt to new realities. Thank you.
Any reactions?
Well, first of all, let me say that from our part, we have already a network that you probably know, the European Masters of Translation. We're at that network, and we try to communicate in an interactive way, not in a one way, saying that this will perhaps be the needs of, for us, of future translators, so therefore you need to adjust your syllabi and your curriculum to fit our needs. That is not the way it will work. The way it works right now, it will remain like that in an interactive way. We tell you what we think the future will be, what our needs are, or what the industry's needs are in terms of a profile and skill set that a future translator needs to have. But at the same time, you from the academia can also, of course, contribute into this big discussion. And of course, I agree with you, nobody has a crystal ball, except maybe somebody in the States, that can predict how the future will be in this industry, or what should be the qualifications of a translator 5, 10, 20 years from now. I used the word speculation before intentionally. We are only trying to live the transformation as it comes, and it will be gradual. But you are very right, and I very, very much agree with you and with the applause that you have received, that we need to remain in touch. We need to keep talking to each other, academia and industry, and public services, so that jointly we can identify what the skill set of the new or future profile of a translator should be. And I also saw maybe a question here on how do I gain experience, somebody asked.
Yes. That a lot of people in the room can't find a job in the field due to the lack of experience.
Lack of experience.
Is there any way to fix that?
Well, again, I think most industries are competitive now. We are living and we're living after the aftermath of a big financial crisis. So bottom line is those that survive are those that can be multi-skilled as well. But for the specific question for translators, what I think is that you should try and take advantage as much as possible of schemes that involve stage, training, voluntary work, or even joining the profession. Initially, maybe not with very big financial rewards, so that you can beef up your CV, and the rest will follow. There is a need, but the need is for, of course, there is a need for professional and experienced translators, but that doesn't happen for young graduates from day one. I don't expect that the young graduate will step into a high-level post in the translation industry. So for me, and we are offering, again, as Commission, and I can advertise this a little bit, we are offering two different types of traineeships. We offer the formal traineeship that you can join through the DG of Education and Culture, where we accept twice a year trainees. Or we have the non-so-formal ways through which you can contact us, and we can see if we can arrange a traineeship without, of course, the payment that normally you receive, or the fee or the salary that you receive through the formal process through the Education and Culture DG. So traineeships and stage, I think it's one way of beefing up CVs.
Do you want to? Yes. I'll go first. Some of the EMT universities have included an internship module on their courses, DCU for example, where the MA students at the end of the year go on a 3-month internship, either within the country or abroad. So that's one possibility, because the experience problem is huge. Companies want people to hit the ground running, to be fully qualified, very good, etc., speedy. Another possibility is for industry to step up to the plate and offer mentorships, offer to mentor new graduates for maybe 2-3 months, something like that, to give them actual texts that are real-world texts, to mentor them through the period, maybe for payment possibly, because it's very difficult for graduates coming out of university after 4 or 5 years of high cost, etc. They do need to be earning a little bit, and to work for absolutely nothing, I think, is a bad sign. But I think there are a lot of companies out there who could perhaps introduce a mentoring program, and it would be something on the translator's CV to say 2 or 3 months of experience, and possibly they would be of interest to that company going forward as well, or not, as the case may be.
Juste brièvement, merci beaucoup pour la question. Je pense on est
Very briefly, well, thank you very much indeed for the question. I think that self-education is something that will be very important, the most important issue throughout education, not just in tertiary education, but primary and secondary education as well. How can you then adapt and change and take on different work throughout your career? But I think that a university education is a place to learn about culture and history and meet people. You could learn the more practical sides of translation elsewhere. Perhaps even machines could do that. Universities could diversify, or perhaps get back to their grassroots, what they were in the past.
Coming to the end of there are 2 questions. So we take these questions. I don't know if that's a jumper. Or so the person on this direction, could you make your question?
Ich weiß nicht, inwiefern hier Deutsch verstanden wird. Auf Französisch kann ich.
I would like to put a question in German, if I may. my English is not terribly good. So you have a choice between French and German.
Et on a
The
parlé du
interpreters
fait
left.
que les traducteurs, qu'est-ce qu'ils doivent faire?
What do translators need to be able to do in order to survive in the future? I'm thinking of freelance interpreters, independent interpreters, who have a wider range of activities, as it were. And I think what's important here is the element of specialization, and specialization in particular in technical fields, because machines translation may be very effective, but there are specializations in certain fields which involve a drafting element, and I think that independent translators need to have also strong skills in terms of drafting, of writing. They earn a good living, but of course you need to pay particular attention to your mother tongue so that you can write in a perfectly correct grammatically and otherwise version. And then as regards cultural orientation, I think when it comes to drafting translation, I think it's there's also an important cultural element. You have to be able to adapt to the target audience. You have to be very familiar with the culture, not just the language, but the culture of the target audience. And then, final point, will translators someday be entitled to species protection, conservation as applies to some forms of wildlife?
Any other question? I think there was somebody else. There, that was first. Now we have too many questions. Okay, so here on the left, can you make your question? If there was somebody? If not, here, please. Can you make your question? Yes.
Il y a encore un digital divide au niveau.
There's still a digital divide worldwide, and I'm not just thinking of Asian countries where 60% of the population is still working in farming. There are billions of people worldwide for whom what we're talking about now goes far beyond their normal life horizons and beyond the philosophical aspects that we've been discussing. In a country such as Italy, which has is lagging behind digitally to an enormous extent. Most of the population can't keep up with this because of problems in the education system, shortcomings in schools and universities. What are we going to do of all the people who have lost out in this, what we're told is an unstoppable and accelerating process? How can we ensure that we avoid the temptation of Luddism as existed in England during the Industrial Revolution?
Brièvement,
very briefly, in answer to the second question, yes, there is a big difference in economic terms, but I've also just come back from China, where you see what is still a developing country that has nonetheless gone beyond what we are doing in Europe in IT terms. In Kenya, people use the M-Pesa system to pay by telephone. on a very wide scale and much more advanced than what we have in Europe. So I think we need to ensure that this digital gap doesn't grow. But at the same time, technology is a way of correcting these, filling in these gaps. In India, for example, with the linguistic differences and the ethnic implications of this, these little smartphone-like devices, which cost $30 or $40, this is something which even peasants can afford because they use them for farming purposes. So I think there are a lot of things that opportunities we can develop.
The end of this conference, so Christos is going to close the conference.
Well, I'm not going to give a big speech. You had enough of those. So all I want to say is that this is the kind of forum that exposes all of us to the latest developments in the language industry, and in this year's forum, specifically to the developments in language technology. And with your contributions here today, and I mean everybody, you actually, believe it or not, help in a way to shape the future of this technological evolution, as I referred to before, and consequently, the future of the translation profession. Many of you, if not all of you, are doing wonderful work, sometimes even innovative and pioneering, important work towards establishing the technological foundations of the translation industry, and we have seen this throughout the day and a half of this forum. And along these lines, I can assure you that the European Commission will continue to play its role in this field, but with you together. So, I really hope to see you again next year, probably November 2019. We have some dates, but it will be sometime in November for the TEF 2019. Although I do have the feeling that in the meantime, many of us will see each other in similar events. Allow me to take a few more minutes just to express some thanks. Yes. First of all, of course, Anna.
Oh.
For an excellent job in moderating this year's forum and for beefing up your CV in doing things like this. All our distinguished panelists, speakers, thank you very much for all your contributions. I cannot forget those people in those booths for all their excellent work. Thank you to our interpreters very much. Always amazes me to see how you can do that. I could never do that. The communication unit in the DGT for organizing it and everybody involved. I should not forget the crews in the stands, in the networking village, and everybody that has put up a stand out there. Thank you also. Matthew, thank you for an excellent job. But I think most of all, I want to say a wholehearted thank you to all of you here, that you have been contributing, like I said, in a very constructive and proactive way. And also thank you to those that are watching us on web streaming, those that are watching us remotely. So this is the end. I would like now to invite you to join us for lunch.